Hello, this is Recovery Diaries in Depth. I'm your host, Gabe Nathan. Thanks so much for joining us. We're very happy to have you here. Today on Recovery Diaries in Depth, we are delighted to have Hannah R. Goodman as our guest. She's a writer, teacher, and a mental health counselor in Rhode Island. She has 2 essays on our site, and she's going to be talking about the one that deals with sticky thoughts. Each week, we'll bring you a Recovery Diaries contributor, folks who have shared their mental health journey with us through essay or video format. We want to see where they are on their mental health journey since initially being published on our website. Our goal is to continue supporting our diverse community by having conversations here on our podcast to follow up and see what has shifted, what has changed, and what new things have emerged. We're so happy to have you along for this journey. We want to remind you to follow our show for new and back episodes at recoverydiaries.org. There, like the podcast, you'll find stories of mental health, empowerment, and change. You can also sign up for our mailing list there so you never miss a new podcast episode, essay, or film. And you can find this podcast pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts. We appreciate your comments and feedback about our show. It helps us improve, make changes, and grow. And of course, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Hannah Goodman, welcome to Recovery Diaries in Depth. It's so lovely to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure. So you are a mental health counselor. You are someone who lives with multiple mental health diagnoses. You came to us a number of years ago by now with your first essay. So I just want to ask you, how are you today? That's the right question to ask, right?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for asking.
You're welcome.
I'm good. I am probably, as far as my mental health goes, I'm probably in the best place I've been since the breakdown I referenced in my first essay, which was in 2014, despite having lots of physical health issues, loss of my father, and some other things go on. Surprisingly.
I'm sorry to hear about that. And it's when I was preparing for this interview today, I was looking at your essay. You have 2 on our site, but I was looking at the one where you reference him specifically, and there's that lovely picture of the 2 of you together, and it's so sweet. Yeah. And I love the moment where he just kind of effortlessly reassures you when you're having these intrusive thoughts and you're talking about it. He says, it's just your anxiety.
Yeah. Yes.
And I was thinking about my parents' relationship to mental health. And it's very different than that. So you were very lucky to have that guy in your life.
It was
kind of giving you that gift.
He was a huge influence on just talking about my anxiety because he suffered from these panic attacks. And we used to sit on my porch as an adult and talk. And one of our last porch talks, he shared with me, I think I had forgotten about this, that he wanted to be a psychiatrist. He wanted to work in mental health. He never did. He was a mad scientist, a research physicist. But he was very proud of me that I became a therapist and that I was also able to write about my anxiety and talk about my anxiety. And he was, fathers are complicated, parents are complicated.
Amen.
But especially for the time period he comes from, I thought it was great that he, from the beginning, the very first panic attack, he said, and to my mom's credit too, she said, your father has these. So, of course, they didn't know what to do back then. They just threw a Xanax, not a Xanax. What was it back then? Whatever the big drug was.
You said you got a script for Valium.
Yes.
As a kid.
Yes.
Right.
One pill. And I said, you know what? Even though I was 17, I was like, you know what? I don't think this is the right one for me.
And that's great because another type of person might have taken one pill and been like, God damn, this is the thing for me. So it's good that you didn't go that way. That's great.
No, but one of the things about people with anxiety disorders that I have found as a clinician And as a human with an anxiety disorder, we're too neurotic half the time to really abuse. Honestly, in my case, and then also in the case of a lot of my clients, the level of neurosis, like to get someone to take a medication, even with an anxiety disorder, can be
So
hard.
I'll speak to that myself. I started going to counseling in college at the College Counseling Center, and I was referred almost immediately to a psychiatrist to be put on medication, and I was that bad. And I said, absolutely not. I'm so scared. And also, as a college student, I never drank, and I mean never.
Same.
And and at a big drinking school, but I was absolutely terrified of what a drink would do to me, and what a lowering of my inhibitions would be like, and if I wasn't in full control of everything that I said or did. And to this day, I don't drink, and it's what you say about people with anxiety disorders and resistance to addiction, or even anything that could potentially, no matter how far-fetched the scenario, go down that road. That rings very true to me.
It's so true that I actually, similar to you, I was in college and never drank. I had some bad experiences with alcohol before I realized I had a panic disorder. And no one, it all made sense after. But in college, I never drank. In my 20s and my 30s, I'm turning 50 this year. And I started having wine about 5 years ago. And my psychiatrist said to me, this is a big breakthrough for you. Normally, I don't encourage drinking. You know what I'm talking about, right?
My therapist has recommended, Gabe, like maybe a drink or two every now and then might not be the worst thing for you. And I'm like, what the hell's wrong with you? But I get it.
She's a good therapist, because it was really wonderful for me to learn that I was able to have the altered state and not only be okay, but actually enjoy it,
Right. Not do anything criminal, and not, lose your mind or debase yourself in public. Or
well, maybe a little debasing, but not in public. I like to drink in my house with my family.
That's good. But it's exposure therapy.
It really was. Is. And everything, I mean, quite honestly, every day is exposure therapy. So,
right.
But that was a big one. And it is a big one. I have a couple clients that won't drink, and I share my story and I say, just a sip. I want you to do a sip and just sort of experience what that's like. And, which is funny, right? Like that's not normally what you hear, but we are special breed.
That's for sure. My therapist has also tried to convince me to be late to things, which is another thing that I used to show up. This interview is not about me, but
it's okay. It's okay.
We do share a lot.
Yeah.
When I used to work at a psychiatric hospital, I would show up like 2 hours early for my shift and just sit in the parking lot. And I even got I would get yelled at for clocking in early. Like, you can't clock in this early. If you're going to show up, you have to stay in the parking lot. It was very aberrant behavior that at a psychiatric hospital maybe should have been treated differently.
Yeah, right.
For a staff member, but no. But I would show up really early to these therapy appointments, and my therapist was like, you really need to dial it back. Like, it would be really great if you could show up like 10 minutes early, or even be 10 minutes late.
Yeah.
I think that would be really healthy for you to experience that, and what is the fear, of course, that a persona that I have built up of being reliable, dependable, will somehow be eroded, and that people will have a negative perception of me because late is not nice. It's disrespectful to be late. But I was never actually going to be late.
But even if you were, I would argue that late doesn't always equal disrespectful. Late equals a lot of different things.
It's just sometimes shit happens. And we have to be human.
And we have to be okay that we're not perfect. And that's a big problem for those of us with anxiety disorders. Is a big part of my exposure therapy back when I had my breakdown in 2014 with this therapist who, he was kind of mean, but he was good. And he really pushed me to do all those things. I had gone for 10 years without real symptoms. And then bam, over 10 years. And then I just fell apart and I wouldn't leave the house. I had children. I had a life. I had a business and I had to quickly get back. And it was exposure therapy, which I think is, you can't just do exposure therapy. I just also want to say, we are complicated, multi-layered people, but a big part of the crisis aspect of panic and anxiety disorders and OC, all the things, is to do some exposure. So you have a good therapist.
Yeah. I've been seeing him since 2010. Yeah. So we're pretty tight. And, I obviously wouldn't be sticking around if I questioned that. He knows what's up. Yeah. Question for you about writing. Do you view writing about your mental health as a form of exposure therapy?
Yes. When I wrote both of those pieces that are on your site, I think the first one, I was 2017. So I was finishing school that year to be a therapist. It was my third career and had come out to close friends at my place of work, which at that point had become this large therapy practice, and even to my patients. And exhilarating and healing on both ends. There's something very bonding about that and the trust. Someone coming in and being like, what does she know? And then I go, honey, let me tell you what I know.
Right.
So what scared me about doing this and what I felt compelled to do was that now I was really coming out. It's one thing to come out one at a time. It's another thing. I also had no idea, maybe nobody would read this. Come to find out, a lot of people, right? So it was.
We try to make sure of that.
Job done. Great job. Yeah. And it was my therapist at the time that said, just do it. Again, what's the worst that will happen? Oh, you won't be perceived as perfect. What is perfect? All those things. So yes, writing about mental health is exposure. I continue to write about mental health I have a Substack now that's a lot more casual. I'm a psychotherapist by day, but I'm actually a romance novelist by night. That's a whole other story. I just had a romance book come out in January. That's exposure therapy because that's a whole side of me that is really up for ridicule, right? Like I'm putting myself on the chopping block. And I have a practice and I have, my patients and stuff. Oh my God, what's that going to do?
You publish under your real name?
I do.
Okay,
but I add the R. You'll love this. Instead of just Hannah Goodman. Oh, I think I did it for this too. My writing persona is Hannah R. Goodman. I don't know. I couldn't, you know what? I can't keep track of a pen name and and also it's an act of, I'm constantly putting myself in situations that I'm incredibly uncomfortable and finding that it peaks. It does the same thing every time that my original therapist told me. He said, your anxiety is going to peak and it's going to fall down. And it happens every time.
What is that ride like? Is it different than it was earlier?
Yes. There's a liberty in getting to be very close to 50. Each year of my 40s, it became more and more, and probably watching health issues go on, my father's cancer. I just realized, and he was always like, can I swear on here or is that not allowed?
Oh God, fuck yes.
Okay. Oh yes. Yeah. Okay. My dad was like, fuck everything, go for it, be yourself. And my dad was definitely himself. He had no problem. And so, yeah, I think that the ride is better now. I'm having some trouble with this book that just came out because my practice is now thriving and it's big, for a solo practitioner. And my therapist gave me an exposure assignment a couple of weeks ago. I had a signing coming up in the town where I work. And she said, I want you to put a sign up in your office. And I was like, oh God, are you sure? She said, I am sure. And I did. And I had a patient come in who's been with me since the first day of my practice. He looked at me and he says, looks behind me, goes, so do you write for the money? He's a funny guy. Do you write for the money?
So no, I'm a therapist for the money.
Yeah, right. I go, no. It was just really funny. And then he asked me just a couple questions, and I'm a very, transparent person. I said, yeah, I write romance novels. And he was like, oh, okay. And then we moved on. See, and that was important
Yeah.
to have that happen. Because look, I live in Rhode Island. You realize like everybody knows
Small
everybody.
state. Yep.
Someone's going to find out. And
Sure.
so far, nothing terrible's happened.
Yeah. And it won't. But of course, there's that nagging voice of anxiety. What if? And there's a part, oh God, I can't remember which essay of yours it is.
Okay.
Where I think it's about the knife. Right here it is.
Oh,
it's right here.
The knife.
So I was standing there in my kitchen. I know you're supposed to be reading this.
No, you read.
The blade of the knife gleaming and scaring the shit out of me because of the thoughts I had. What if I lose control and stab myself in the stomach? What if blood goes everywhere? What if I can't stop and I just go crazy? And again, as someone who also lives with generalized anxiety disorder, that those two words, what if, just ring in my head constantly. And it is just, it's a constant companion. It's a constant critical voice. And what I've learned about that voice is it's like the guardrail on the side of the highway as you're driving up a mountain. It wants to keep you safe.
That's all it does. Yes.
And so I've tried to learn about it as less of an antagonist, which is, I think in my 20s, that's how I viewed it. It was this enemy that just kept coming at me that I had to keep fighting back. Yeah. And now I kind of understand it. Yeah. And I have empathy for it, for those two words.
All your brain wants to do is keep you alive. And if the back of your brain takes over and the executive function skills kind of like go offline, it's going to do a misfire, but it thinks it's trying to help you. It's all about us saying, okay, oh, I get it. All right, thank you, brain. I say this all the time to myself, and I tell my clients, when that starts, two things. Oh, that's my anxiety. And then thank you.
Yeah.
Because
my
the
anxiety
secondary
loves me, really.
Yeah, it does. A lot. It loves you a lot. And when I think I talk about in that essay where if you struggle with it and you start arguing with it, now you're causing the secondary pain. And that can be, and to me, I think when I work with patients, I see that's actually what perpetuates us, starts to form problems like agoraphobia or like, just not being able to do things.
Yeah. You mentioned to me right before we started the interview that you're in I think you said a quote, weird place with your writing related to mental health. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because it's such an important part of your life, and you have the Substack, and the romance novels. So what's the weird place?
Okay, so here's where my panic comes in, but we're doing exposure therapy, so we're going to go for it. Let's have it happen right here. My breakdown in 2014, and I don't remember, I did reread the essay, and then, as an anxious person, I forgot everything I read. I don't know how much time I spent, but the kickoff for it was breaking up with my agent at the time and realizing that my dream of being the next Judy Blume that I'd worked for since, I was, I think 37 at the time, 38, and I'd started working towards that since I was, 15, realizing the truth of the publishing world and all of the disappointment and all the things that went wrong in that relationship with her, which was 5 years, it really took a toll on me. Like it felt like the end of the world, which when I tell people this, I'm like, man, I don't know if I can convey the impact of having a dream and actually working on it and being this close for, at that point, like almost 20 years and then gone. And I just had to I was in the process of, I had a tutoring business. Before that, I was a high school English teacher, had kids, wanted to be home, had a tutoring business, got my MFA, got agents, got awards, got this, got that. The ball was rolling. And then bam, this last agent I had just failed me miserably. I feel comfortable saying I've written about it. So that happened. And the embarrassment, the failure, the lack of perfection, having to face everyone in my family that I had failed. I had to face students. I taught writing workshops. I taught writing workshops and publishing at this point. And I had to talk about exposure therapy. I had to tell everyone about my failure. And it ripped me apart. It ripped me apart. It was really bad. Really bad. So now that's the bad part. Fast forward, go to a great therapist, get my life together, refocus my life so that my self-worth is no longer tied to whether or not I'm the next Judy Bloom. Work really hard at becoming a therapist, fall in love with that. Write basically, by the way, the essay, the first one that you published was, I don't even know if I don't think I say this. My therapist said, I want you to write something and submit it somewhere and I want you to try to fail.
Mm. Oh, damn. I should have rejected it. Sorry.
No, and a beautiful thing happened. It was okay either way. So when I did make it, it was like, oh, but my whole self-worth isn't defined by this. This is the cherry on top. This is my art. This is not all of me. This isn't defining me. So I worked through all of that, and things started to happen as they do when you stop holding something with a chokehold. Mm-hmm. So I had my essay published with you, and then several other online mental health publications. Then I got a book contract on my own without an agent in 2018. Then I got another book contract in 2023, but my dad passed away just as I got that contract. And I did not have the energy, nor the will, nor the desire. Because what it takes to be an unfamous author, and I wrote all about this on my Substack if anybody wants to, and it's about mental health too. What it takes to be an unfamous author is you really got to swallow any ego you have. And I knew that. I knew that I was at risk of tying my self-worth to whether or not this book was going to do well or not. And I had to be careful. My dad had just died. So I'm in a weird place because my dad passed away in 2023. Publishing is a long process. So the book didn't come out until 2025, January. And truth be told, it's hard. It's hard I just had a book signing where they did not do a nice job of making me feel welcomed. I wrote about that too on my Substack. So my mental health, my husband actually said to me today that the only thing he's worried about with this book is how am I really? Or am I able to separate my self-worth from how I'm going to be received and how my book's going to be received? Because if you're not famous and you write a fiction novel, you're pounding pavement.
Yeah.
So.
Well, how are you really?
Not great with the publishing stuff, I'll be honest with you. At least now I'm able to say I'm great here and I'm great here. Like I'm able to kind of, but the publishing, this has not been easy. This recent book signing was humiliating. A lot of things were said and promised, and then I get there and nothing, like shoved in a corner. No, it just was bad. And I wrote this whole thing on Substack that I felt like guilty for feeling, you know this, right? I did something wrong.
Yeah, of course.
You know what that is. That's our anxiety. That's our generalized anxiety. That's our OCD. And it was flaring loud. So I did the only thing I know how to do besides take my meds, get exercise, and go to therapy.
Just write about it.
I wrote about it.
Yeah.
And I have more to say. Like I wrote it and I sent it to my good friends, and they're like, I think you got more to say. But I'm also afraid, like, what's going to happen if that bookstore, which is my favorite bookstore, or it used to be, but I have to tell, I shouldn't be swallowing, that's another thing we do. Those of us with anxiety is we just like put up with a lot of shit. Mm-hmm. And we let ourselves get treated like this was not good.
Yeah. And if one of the things that's lovely about getting, closer to 50 or whatever age it is for other people is that I'm kind of done being the world's doormat,
Yeah, I
then
agree.
I don't know, lean into that. Because what if the owner of blah, blah, half price books or whatever it is gets pissed off at you? Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
And I say this a lot when people are anxious in my office and I go, is your side of the street clean? And mine is. I did not do anything other than do what I was supposed to do.
Right.
And if there's going to be blame and we're going to point fingers, it's definitely not at me. When you invite someone to be a guest in your bookstore, I've done this for 20 years. There are things booksellers and event planners do. None of those things occurred. In fact, it was, again, humiliating. And thank God, my husband, one of my daughters, two of my best friend, one of my really good friends, everyone's there for me to support me. And that's, if you're attempting to do this, you have to have support, people who love you. And thank God for them. But they were all looking after. They were like, oh my God, is she okay?
Sure.
Yeah. And I'm okay. I'm like, I'm fine. I'm not having a panic attack. I'm not like ripping myself apart, self-esteem wise, or like I have a lot of self-compassion for myself, but I am so sad and disappointed because this book, this is the one that my agent and I broke up over because she did such a shit job of doing what she was supposed to do. And so I'm sad about that. I'm sad that we're off to this start. And it's just really disappointing. And I have to face that.
Face it and express yourself about it and work through it.
Work through it.
And because it's also bringing up all that stuff about the relationship with the agent. So that's all still there. And that's hard.
Yeah. And feeling humiliated is such a weird feeling because, if you dissect humiliation, it's like, well, but it's not your fault. And yet, you know what really sucks is, and I think a lot of us with anxiety disorders wind up feeling this way. It's like, but I didn't do anything wrong. And I'm the one carrying around false guilt. Like,
right.
Which I used to call myself when I was trying to get better, like way back when I had my breakdown, I used to call myself an anxiety warrior. Like I was trying to talk myself up, because that's what I feel like in these moments. Like I'm an anxious person, so I'm automatically going to assume responsibility, even for whatever. But then that stronger part of me, that warrior, has to be like, no, protect yourself. You didn't do anything wrong, So how am I doing? It's hard. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
And it's much better than like diluting or putting on an act or a mask, which is what, a lot of us do to get through just the everyday and also the really hard stuff. But let's move on to a lovelier part of writing and self-expression. And let's get into one of the two essays of yours that are on our site.
Okay.
And this one is called When Thoughts Are Sticky, Pure OCD and Generalized Anxiety Disorder by Hannah R. Goodman.
Though I'm in recovery from generalized anxiety disorder, that doesn't mean I am cured. GAD can be chronic with periods of remission and mini flare-ups. One of the symptoms I struggle with during these mini flare-ups is intrusive thoughts. These thoughts are not necessarily pathological or an indication of a mental illness. If you are human, you have had an intrusive thought at some point in your life. Make that probably some point in your day. Intrusive thoughts are basically anxious, scary thoughts that float into your brain, sometimes for no specific reason. The majority of the time, those thoughts float in and float out, and you can move on with your day. For me, sometimes I go for long stretches where these types of thoughts don't really stick to me. An anxious thought floats in, I take note of it, and then I can watch it float by. Other times when I'm having a mini flare-up of anxiety, Anxious, scary thoughts stomp into my brain, have a fit, and they don't leave. In this state, my thoughts do this OCD type of thing that I call sticky thinking. This is sometimes referred to as pure OCD. With this type of thinking, you feel like you are grabbing onto each and every disturbing or painful thought and then wrestling it into the ground in the hopes that you will make it go away. Earlier this year, I found myself in a desperate wrestling match with some very sticky thinking. I was going through some of my out-of-control work-related stress and noticed that my thinking was becoming more and more sticky with each passing day, to the point where every time I would walk into the kitchen, I would think, there are knives in here. What if I lose control and stab myself? Or if I manage to make it all the way to the kitchen and actually pick up one to use to cut up fruit for my daughter or carrots for dinner time, I would immediately worry that if I didn't cut everything up quickly, I might lose control and stab myself. One morning during this time, I was running around getting my youngest ready for school while also trying to pack my own lunch to take to work, when just the sight of a kitchen knife laying on the countertop triggered me. I began to worry and obsess that I might grab the knife and totally lose control and stab myself, and then my children would see this and I would forever scar them. Because this was not my first time in a mini OCD flare-up, there was a part of me that knew I was having these thoughts not because I actually want to stab myself, but because I'm afraid that somehow, and here is where the irrational brain does its thing, I will lose control, blink out like a computer on overload, and possibly act on this scary thought. It's the obsessive and compulsive process of, if I think it, then I won't do it because I will scare myself enough. So there I was standing in my kitchen, the blade of the knife gleaming and scaring the shit out of me because of the thoughts I had. What if I lose control and stab myself in the stomach? What if blood goes everywhere? What if I can't stop and I just go crazy? Though this only lasted a few minutes, those moments were treacherous, and a lot went on in those moments. My mind went right to, but I don't want to hurt myself. What if I can't stop myself? Oh no, why am I having this thought? Then, great, you're going crazy. See, you can't be a therapist. You're sicker than any client you may ever help. But unlike what might have happened years ago, I caught myself. I became mindful of what was happening, and instead of wrestling with the thought or trying to stomp on it and make it go away, I took a breath and then another, focusing on the in and the out sensation. And in this act, I began to allow for some space between me and these scary thoughts. In this space, I was able to remember what a therapist once advised for these moments. Tell yourself, okay, that thought scares me. Of course it does. That's fine. Let it be. Do nothing. Just breathe. This type of self-talk is what helps me get through a mini flare-up. I'm not turning away from or avoiding my thoughts. Instead, I acknowledge them, and then I focus on the breath, which brings me into the moment. The way I spoke to myself when I first saw the knife was all future-oriented, what-if thinking, the type of thinking that can really amp up my anxiety. However, I caught myself, and then basically challenged these thoughts with soothing, rational, in-the-moment self-talk. When I did this, I felt my anxiety lower. I continued to make my lunch and then move on to the rest of the morning. I remember the first time I had scary knife thoughts, as I referred to them. I was in my late teens and on vacation with my recently divorced dad. On that first night after a day of cross-country skiing, as I waited in the lobby for my dad to go to dinner, an image of the blade of a knife came to my mind. I wasn't hallucinating. It was a clear image of a knife and the sharp tip of it in my mind's eye. It caused me to cringe a little, almost as if thinking about it would cause it to physically hurt me. I tried to push it away, but it kept returning. Finally, over dinner, I confessed to my father, and he simply said, "That's your anxiety. Don't worry about it." Though my dad wasn't a mental health provider, he was no stranger to the weirdness of anxiety symptoms. And since he had them himself, he normalized this experience for me. On and off over the next decade, these thoughts would come in and stick, and I would think of my dad, what my dad told me, and somehow I was able to move on. But here I was at that kitchen counter, a full-grown adult with the responsibility and stress of small children, work, and marriage, having those same knife thoughts. This time they weren't fleeting. They were constant, triggered by anything from watching MasterChef to walking by a knife that lay on the counter in the kitchen. I was in therapy at the time for a tune-up for my anxiety, and told my therapist to explain that what pure OCD is. Knowing that this had a specific name helped, and knowing that it was, as my father had indicated years before, another symptom of anxiety, I could put it in perspective. That didn't make learning to cope with these thoughts easy, but it definitely made it possible. My thinking during these times can not only be scary, but also make me feel like I'm a bad or evil person for having such thoughts. But then I remind myself that a thought is just a thought, not a behavior. The very fact that these scary thoughts cause anxiety means that I don't want to act on those thoughts. And at the same time, a thought only has the power that you give it. I take the power of irrational, scary thoughts through soothing self-talk and breathing into the present moment. In the past, I would work very hard to push away, deny, avoid, or repress all scary thoughts, yelling at myself, hiding knives, and avoiding using anything sharp, even a pair of scissors. All that did was increase the power of the thoughts. And then I actually made my anxiety worse because I created more suffering, which is now a secondary pain to the first. Secondary suffering occurs in an effort to avoid the emotional pain. You shove it away forcibly, and in the act of shoving, you actually become more upset. The best way to explain this is from a video by Birch that I watched when I took the Pay Loose mindfulness course, which shows an example of how secondary pain works. Basically, it's the original pain. It's like the original pain is a blue cushion on your lap, and the secondary pain is piling more and more cushions on top of the original blue one. It's like when you feel that first rush of panic that is painful, but it's the piling on of what ifs and coulds that we tend to add to panic that actually makes it a whole lot worse. My heart is racing and my skin is hot. I'm having a panic attack. First blue cushion. Oh no. First purple. I could die. Second purple cushion. What if I go crazy? Third purple cushion. What if I pass out? Fourth purple cushion. What if I blink out and can't remember anything and do something stupid? Fifth purple cushion. When we reach a 5 cushion pileup, we are at a 10 on the anxiety scale. We might even be in a full-blown panic attack mode. This is where the compassion and rational self-talk can come in. Not to push away anything, but to actually turn towards it. I like to picture the thoughts as leaves floating by on a stream, and I'm looking at them passing by. The key for me is not to spend too much time here to note or acknowledge, and then, this is the key part, move on to the next thing. This has taken a tremendous amount of practice, and even now that I've become really good at it, there are moments, sometimes a lot of moments, when the sticky thought really gets stuck, and I'll try desperately to pry it off my brain. That's when I take a step back, breathe, and visualize those thoughts as leaves on the stream, and then I get on with my day.
Thank you so much for reading that.
You're welcome.
That was really wonderful to listen to in your own voice.
Thanks.
What was that like for you, reading that and looking back on when you wrote that and sent that here and all of that?
I felt so calm. I felt so oddly calm reading it. I mean, I was like nervous about reading and all the normal nerves, but like the thing itself, you know, it used to activate me just to talk about. And that was all part of my exposure therapy and I didn't feel, on a scale of 0 to 10, there was like no anxiety. So I wasn't afraid of knives. I wasn't afraid of like all of that is how it used to go. Triggers, and really, it's just kind of amazing to read it now. And when I'm meant to be a therapist. When I read that, I wrote that in 2019. I just started my private practice, had only been a therapist for maybe 4 years, I guess, at that time. And I'm not supposed to be the next Judy Bloom. I'm supposed to be Hannah the therapist. That's for sure.
That a great realization. I love that, like, all roads lead to here. You've had 3 careers. You've gone through a lot of shit. There's multiple mental health diagnoses here and challenges that you're struggling with, but you're doing the thing that you're supposed to be doing. And I just think that's really great.
Yeah, I do too. And you can still have heartbreak.
Sure.
Even when you've sort of arrived at a place where you are really quite happy. I'm quite happy. Isn't that interesting? You can be quite happy and still have this. I mean, it sounds, whatever it sounds like. I mean, I'm an artist too. And the fiction writing is an art it's hard to be an artist. It's so hard because you put so many hours into things, right? And someone may never see it. Or if they do, I think about how quickly people read books. And I'm like, no, do you know how long that writer took?
Well, I have that struggle. I mean, in my personal life, like I write a lot, and I went to school for theater, and it was very clear to me very early on that I was not going to become a professional performer. So I do that as community theater and things like that. And you find all these ways to keep something alive, right? Or to sublimate, or to go down a different track and not lose that thing. But it's a constant struggle and a constant pain. But professionally here at Recovery Diaries, we publish long form essays. The essays are 1,200 words, 1,500 words. A lot of times they're longer. And then I get these stats that the average length of time people spend on the site is a minute and 1 second. Like, nobody's reading a 1,500 word essay in a minute. And it's very disheartening because it's like, well, what are people doing? And are people really getting what we want them to get out of these essays or these films that are 15 minutes long or 7 minutes long, or, so that's really hard. But the fact of the matter is that it gets down to control, and that I can't control how long people stay on the site, and I can't control if they thoughtfully read something, or if they are listening to a podcast while they're doing dishes and they're maybe getting 30% of it, or what. We can't control it. We just put something out into the world and hope.
I love everything you just said. It was very healing to hear. I think as a writer, I'm pretty isolated. I used to have a community that I was really part of. I haven't. I need to find that again, but I appreciate what you're saying, because we're saying, like, I got it. I'm right there with you, because you put so much, and you do think, oh, I can't wait for someone to read. This is going to change people. And I, for example, this book I just published, like, it has a pretty controversial twist. And I was just like, this is going to start conversation. Like, nope. All I get listen, I'm grateful when anybody reads my book. Don't get me wrong, but I wanted control. I wanted this to be a conversation starter about a specific thing. And it's disappointing that it's not.
But I'll counter you with one small thing, is that there may be conversations happening about this that you have no idea are happening. They might be happening in someone's living room. They might be happening between two colleagues at work. Like, oh my God, did you read Hannah's book? Like, you have no idea.
Oh, I love that.
So we only know what we see online in the comments section or in comments on social media posts. If they're not there, that can give us a message that it's not happening at all. And that's not necessarily true. And the fact of the matter is that even if one person reads it and it's sparking conversation internally in them, it's getting them to think about something in a different way, then that's great. Then it is happening.
And I think what's changed, I think you're bringing up a really important point about writing today, even from 10 years ago, is a lot of people read stuff and they don't necessarily respond online. I'm guilty of it. I try to be very thoughtful. And if I take the time to read something and finish it, I try to give some sort of indication, just because I know what it's like to be on the other side. But most people aren't thinking that way. And I'll have people reach out to me maybe about something on a Substack or whatever, not in the comments, but directly. But I sort of forget that, right? Like, in those moments. I forget.
Because we want to see the engagement. We want to see
I want to see the engagement.
Right now. Yeah, I get it. Believe me, it's the same thing here. I want to see the stats for the essays. I want to look at YouTube views and of the films, all of that shit. But that only tells a piece of the story. So just don't forget that.
I know. You're right. You're right. I do have to remember that.
And that's the note we're going to leave it on, a hopeful, lovely, positive note.
Yes,
is you
I like that.
You don't always know the things that the stuff that we put out into the world is sparking in other human beings. And that's the wonderful thing, I think, about being, a creative person, which you clearly are. So keep putting it out there.
I'm going to keep trying. Thank you. This was inspiring to me. Like, this was a great conversation, and it's made me even think about that heartbreak I'm experiencing with writing a little bit differently. And that's the other thing for anxiety, right? We get locked into one perspective when we're an anxious person. So we have to widen the perspective. So I take a lot from this. This has probably been, this is the highlight. So if nothing else happens related to writing, I'm good.
This is the golden nugget for the week.
That's it. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us in conversation today. It's beautiful to see the progression of our contributors. Thank you so much to our guest today, Hannah R. Goodman. She's a writer, teacher, and a mental health counselor. She has 2 personal mental health essays on our site. She has a new romance book out and a Substack. You can follow her there at substack.com at Hannah R. Goodman. Before we leave you, we want to remind you to check out our website, recoverydiaries.org. There, like this podcast, you'll find additional stories, videos, and content about mental health, empowerment, and change. We look forward to continuing to grow our community. Thank you so much for being a part of it. We wouldn't be here without you. Be sure to join our mailing list so you never miss a podcast episode, essay, or film. I'm Gabe Nathan. Until next time, take good care.